All right, imagine this for a second. You own a piece of property. You've got the official title, the records are all clear. Then, out of the blue, the government tells you that a part of your land, well, it never actually existed. We're diving into a fascinating legal mystery today. The story of how a hospital had to fight for a piece of land that just vanished from the books.
And this whole case, it all boils down to this one number, 28 square meters. Now, to give you an idea of what that looks like, think of a big master bedroom, or maybe a small studio apartment. So, it's not a massive plot of land, but in a crowded city, that kind of space is incredibly valuable.
And this very piece of land, which belonged to the Chongshan Hospital, right in a prime spot in Taipei, was just erased from the official land registry. I mean, one day it's there on the books, 1,371 square meters. The next, poof, the record is corrected down to 1,343.
So, this brings us to the big question we're tackling in this explainer. See, this wasn't some new mistake. The real problem, the root of it all, was a tiny calculation error made way back in 1977. So how on earth does a 40-year-old blunder suddenly turn into a multi-million-dollar lawsuit? Let's find out.
Okay, so to really get how a mistake from decades ago could cause so much trouble now, we have to go back and see how this property shrank, at least on paper.
What's really wild here is just how long this took to unfold. It all kicks off in 1977, when a survey team messes up a calculation. And for decades, nobody notices a thing. Fast forward to 2008, the Chongshan Hospital buys the land, totally trusting the official but wrong record. It's not until 2021, think about that, 2021, that the Dan Land Office finally finds the mistake and fixes it. Just like that, the hospital's property shrinks overnight, and you can bet a year later, they were in court.
So the battle lines were drawn pretty clearly. On one side, you've got Chongshan Hospital saying, hey, the government just illegally tanked the value of our property. And on the other side, the Dan Land Office is basically saying, don't look at us, we were just cleaning up someone else's old mess. And what were they fighting over? The stakes were huge. Over 15 million new Taiwan dollars for that piece of vanished land.
All right, so they take it to court. And at first, you'd think this is a pretty open and shut case. The hospital's argument was really simple, but also really powerful. They basically said, look, we bought this land based on your official records. When you corrected it, you damaged our assets. They pointed to Taiwan's Land Act, which says the government is on the hook for registration errors. And their key point was this: it doesn't matter who messed up 40 years ago, the land office is the one responsible for the final official record everyone trusts.
And you know what? The district court totally agreed. They sided with the hospital, ruling that the land office has a basic responsibility to make sure its records are accurate. Where the mistake came from, that didn't matter. They couldn't just pass the buck.
And boom! Just like that, the court ordered the land office to pay up the full amount. It seemed like a clear win for the hospital, and a great moment for the idea that, yeah, you should be able to trust government records. But this is where our story takes a turn.
Because this is where things get, well, complicated. The land office appealed the decision, and the whole case took a sharp, unexpected turn, all because of a very tricky legal detail.
Get this. The High Court completely overturned the decision. The hospital's victory was gone. And why? It all hinged on this tiny but critical difference between two types of mistakes. Okay, so the High Court drew this line in the sand. They said there's a measurement error, that's the original mistake the survey team made back in '77, and then there's a registration error. That would be if the land office clerk, for example, wrote the number down wrong. The court's verdict? The measurement error definitely happened. But a registration error? Nope. They said that didn't happen.
And here is the legal loophole they used. The High Court had this super narrow definition. They said a registration error only happens if the final document doesn't match its source document.
So the land office's whole argument, their big defense, was basically this: we didn't make a mistake when we registered it. We just perfectly copied the wrong number from the survey team's report. And since their final registration matched its source document, even though that source was wrong, the High Court said, well, technically, that's not a registration error. And just like that, the land office was off the hook.
But the hospital was not having it. They refused to accept that logic. So they took their case all the way to the top, to Taiwan's Supreme Court, for one last shot.
And at this point, their argument was really about a bigger principle. They argued that, hey, for the whole system to work, people have to be able to trust the final official document they're given. You shouldn't have to hire a detective to investigate if some survey team made a mistake 40 years ago, right?
And this is where the Supreme Court stepped in and delivered a landmark ruling. They just sliced right through all that legal nitpicking with this powerful statement. They basically said, look, if the first number is wrong, and that means the last number wrong, then the whole thing is a registration error. Simple as that.
The court's logic was just so clear and simple. First, they said the whole point of the Land Act is to protect regular people. Second, people trust the final document in their hands, not some pile of paperwork in a dusty archive. Third, if the survey is wrong, the final registration is bound to be wrong. And therefore, fourth, the end result is a registration error and the land office is responsible, period.
So what this did was establish a new, much broader, and honestly, a much more citizen-friendly definition. A registration error is simply an incorrect final record that you, the public, rely on. That's it. It doesn't matter where the mistake started, the buck stops with that final official document.
So yeah, the hospital finally got its money, but the real impact of this case goes way, way beyond this one dispute over a piece of land.
I mean, this decision was a huge win for public trust. It basically confirms that the government has what's called no-fault liability. They're responsible for the final record being right, end of story. It closed that crazy legal loophole that could have let different government departments just point fingers at each other forever. And most importantly, it protects every single property owner out there by making sure those official records are something you can actually rely on.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. The Supreme Court said the government's job isn't just to be a good copy machine, correctly moving numbers from one form to another. No, its job is to be responsible for the accuracy of the final record that you and I depend on. They guarantee the result, not just the process.
So, in the end, this case of the vanishing land wasn't really about 28 square meters at all. It was about making sure that when the government issues an official document, whether it's a land title, a birth certificate, anything, you can actually trust it, 100%. And that kind of makes you think, doesn't it? What other official records do we take for granted every single day, just assuming they're completely accurate?